And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing the next weak system here moving into the southwest coast with some mixed precipitation here over the Yukon Delta, and then a narrow band of rain or light showers here back across the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, another system out here to the west starting to affect the western Aleutians there. Some light snow over the central interior and low pressure here pulling west-northwest toward Prince William Sound along the North Gulf Coast. But flow around that's going to keep it showery and over the Panhandle with areas of rain developing and pulling again westward here along the eastern and central North Gulf Coast. And then tomorrow that rain will move into Prince William Sound and at least portions of the Kenai Peninsula, possibly as far west as eastern Turnagain Arm. Areas of light snow continue over the central interior, and it stays damp and cloudy over the Panhandle. This system out here starting to deepen as it moves east and southeast, with the front bringing increased wind and rain to the Aleutians, central Aleutian areas, high pressure in advance of that, light winds, dry conditions here. Eastern Aleutians, remnants of that front with a few isolated showers along the southwest coast. And then for the day on Thursday, that low center tracks southeastward here. Gale and storm force winds here for the central Aleutians on the back side of that system, and gusty winds with rain spreading into the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, and actually pushing up into Kodiak Island later in the afternoon. And we've got scattered showers, cloudy skies, south central Alaska, showers along the North Gulf Coast, and still pretty showery over the southeast coast. Those are light showers though, and some light snow still for the Arctic coast up there. And for the coastal water forecast, on the south coast, southwest winds 10 to 15 knots for Wednesday with 7-foot seas. Up to the north, we've got southeast becoming east-northeast at 15 knots, 7-foot seas. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, south at 20, southeast at 20 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, south winds 15 knots. Then for the day on Thursday, Clarence Strait, southeast at 15, and southeast winds at 10 knots for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. South coast, south winds 15 knots, seas 6 feet. And the north coast, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Prince William Sound in the North Gulf Coast for tomorrow. Light variable wind conditions with seas running 2 to 4 feet. Gale warnings though for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, west-northwesterlies at 35, and Cook Inlet, north breezes at 10 to 15. Cook Inlet, east winds 20 to 25 knots, strongest south of the Forelands, and then those increase further with gale force southeast winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, south winds 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, and south to southeasterlies at 20 to 25 knots on the east side. Prince William Sound, wind will be southeast at 20 knots with seas running 5 feet. Kodiak Island tomorrow, west to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, west winds at 15 for Bristol Bay, and variable winds for the Alaska Peninsula at 10 to maybe 15 knots. And then a big increase in the winds here for Thursday ahead of that front. Looking at the winds for the Alaska Peninsula out of the south to southeast at 30 to 45 knots. Behind the front, the winds coming down southwest at 30 knots. And some storms here from Sitkinak to Sand Point at about 55 knots out of the southeast. And pretty windy there for Bristol Bay. Southeast winds 45 knots. Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds 40 to 45 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, variable winds 10 to 20 knots. Variable to south at 10 to 20 at 20 for the central Aleutians here. Small craft advisories there for the western Aleutians for west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Then on Thursday, gale warnings here for the western Aleutians. Direction northwest at 40 to 45 knots. Storm warnings for Adak and Atka. Northwest winds at 50 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, west winds 30 to 40 knots. Seas there running 7 to 12 feet. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, west winds 10 to 15 knots. Southeast of 15 for St. Lawrence Island. Light east wind for Norton Sound. And for St. Matthew Island, southwest of 15 knots. That same forecast good for the Pribilof Islands. And for the day on Thursday, Storm warnings for the Pribilofs. East winds 50 knots, seas up to 18 feet. Northeast at 45 knots there for St. Matthew Island, with seas at 16 feet. And south of Nunivak Island here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, good gales there. East at 40 knots, seas 7 feet. Yukon Delta coast, winds lighter out of the east at about 20, and 15 knot east winds for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Up to the Arctic coast, central and east side tomorrow, west winds at about 10 knots. Seas 2 to 3 feet, northwest at 10 for the western coast with 2-foot seas, and north winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas for the Chukchi Sea. And then for Thursday, the Chukchi Sea, we're looking at north winds here 15 to 20 knots, otherwise north at 10 for the western Arctic coast, northwest at 10 for the central coast, and more variable here for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast at about 10 knots with seas 2 feet.